Welcome home, Archivists. You've come to the right place. Most people think a library is a sanctuary of knowledge, a place where stories are kept safe between leather covers. But here in the archive, we know that some stories aren't written in ink, they are hammered into the very foundations with blood and bone. Tonight's file comes from the Pustaka Negeri Sarawak, the State Library in Kuching. It's a beautiful building, isn't it? It sits peacefully by a lake, reflecting the sky. But beneath that reflection lies a silent index, a ledger of souls used to keep the silence of the marsh. Let us look at the record of Azam, a researcher who looked too deep into the genealogy of the dead. Sit. Stay. Don't forget to sign out, if you can. The air conditioning in the special collections wing of the Pustaka Negeri Sarawak didn't just cool the room, it felt like a predator's breath, always a few degrees colder than the rest of the building. Azam, a researcher in his late 20s with glasses and a look of perpetual exhaustion, sat at a heavy mahogany table. He was a man obsessed with the genealogies of the Jaya district, buried under stacks of microfilms and dusty records. Outside, the sun was setting over the library lake, casting long, orange shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making the rows of books look like the bars of a golden cage. The library was nearly empty, the silence so absolute it began to ring in his ears. Azam's concentration was broken when the temperature plummeted. His breath suddenly misted in the air, a white plume in the fading light. At the end of the long aisle, near the Sarawakiana section, a figure appeared. It was a woman, translucent and flickering like a bad digital signal. She wore a faded, floral baju kurung, but where her feet should have been, there was only a blurring of gray mist. She didn't speak. Her face was a mask of pale grief, her eyes fixed on Azam with a desperate, silent intensity. Slowly, she raised a thin, trembling arm, her index finger pointing rigidly toward the floor, specifically toward the restricted access to the basement-level archives. The next morning, Azam returned, unable to shake the image of the woman. He bypassed his usual genealogy research and turned to the digital archives, searching for personnel records from 1999, the year the library was completed. After hours of scrolling through corrupted files and scanned newsletters, he found it, a staff photo. There, standing among the opening day crew, was a young woman named Farrah, wearing the exact same floral baju kurung. The caption read, "In memory of Farrah, whose light was lost too soon." She had disappeared during a late shift stocktake and was never found. Azam zoomed in on the photo. Farrah wasn't looking at the camera, she was looking with wide, terrified eyes at the man standing next to her, the head of archives. As Azam stared at the screen, the monitor flickered. In the dark reflection of the glass, he saw Farrah standing directly behind his chair, her face twisted in terror. She wasn't pointing at the floor this time, her finger pointed at the reflection of the doorway behind him. Azam spun around. Standing in the entrance was the current head of archives. He was an older man with waxy, unnatural skin that looked like it had been stretched too tight over his skull. As the man gripped the doorframe, Azam noticed a jagged white scar across his left knuckle, the same hand visible in the 1999 photograph. The archivist's voice was like the sound of dry paper rubbing together. "Finding what you need, Azam?" he asked, his eyes unblinking. He stepped into the corral, the smell of metallic salt and old glue following him. "The basement records are much more complete. Why don't I take you down there?" Azam felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He knew he should run, but his curiosity, the researcher's curse, was a leash. He followed the man to the elevator. As they descended, the lift groaned and shuddered, the lights flickering as the floor indicator passed B1 and sunk into the restricted B2 level. The doors opened to a world of raw, sweat-slicked concrete. The air here was heavy, smelling of damp paper and something unpleasantly organic. The archivist walked with a limp, his footsteps echoing through the narrow aisles of rolling metal shelves. The library was built on a marsh, the man whispered, his voice echoing. "Things settle. Things sink." He stopped at a specific spot, a rectangular patch of cement that was a slightly lighter shade than the surrounding floor. Azam looked down and saw a small gold library pin caught in a seam of the concrete, glinting like a trapped eye. Suddenly, Farrah's spirit lunged forward from the shadows. She didn't attack, she passed through the floor at the lighter patch of cement. For a terrifying second, the concrete became translucent, turning the color of red glass. Beneath the foundation, Azam saw the impossible. Dozens of figures were layered like pages in a book, fused into the rebar and the mud. Farrah was there, her lower half merged with the metal. She was a Paku, a spiritual nail, used to hold the building's luck and stability in the marshy ground. The library wasn't just built on a marsh, it was anchored by the souls of the lost staff. The archivist turned to Azam, and the polite mask finally dissolved. Every 25 years, the Foundation needs a new witness to keep the silence, he said, his voice dropping into a guttural growl. You'll make a much better record than Farrah did. As he spoke, the man's eyes began to bleed into a glowing crimson, the unmistakable mark of the red veil. He seemed to grow taller, his shadow stretching across the concrete walls like a multi-limbed beast. He wasn't just a man, he was the guardian of the building's dark hunger. The archivist reached onto a nearby shelf and grabbed a heavy iron book press, a relic of the old binding rooms. He swung it with supernatural strength, the metal whistling through the air. Azam dove behind a rolling metal shelf just in time, the iron smashing into the concrete where his head had been a second before. He scrambled through the labyrinth of B2, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He noticed a narrow ventilation window near the ceiling, barely a slit in the concrete, positioned just above the Pustaka Lake's waterline. Azam was cornered. The archivist blocked the path to the elevator, the iron press dragging on the floor with a terrifying scree-scree sound. Just as the monster prepared to strike, Farrah's spirit let out a crystalline shriek. The sound was so high and so violent that it shattered every glass microfilm case and display box in the room. The shards of glass flew like shrapnel, momentarily blinding the archivist and giving Azam a desperate window of opportunity. The archivist's voice was like the sound of dry paper rubbing together. "Finding what you need, Azam?" he asked, his eyes unblinking. He stepped into the corral, the smell of metallic salt and old glue following him. "The basement records are much more complete. Why don't I take you down there?" Azam felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He knew he should run, but his curiosity, the researcher's curse, was a leash. He followed the man to the elevator. As they descended, the lift groaned and shuddered, the lights flickering as the floor indicator passed B1 and sunk into the restricted B2 level. The archivist recovered, his cold, waxy hand clamping onto Azam's ankle with the strength of a vice. Azam felt his bone creak under the pressure. With a scream of pure adrenaline, he kicked free, losing his shoe to the monster's grip, and launched himself through the narrow opening. He tumbled through the air and plunged into the midnight black water of the lake. The cold was instantaneous, a total sensory blackout as the dark water swallowed him whole. Azam surfaced, gasping for air, the library looming above him like a dark tomb. But he wasn't alone in the water. Behind him, something was swimming with unnatural speed, moving like a giant eel beneath the surface. The archivist had followed him into the lake. Azam swam frantically toward the far shore, but his limbs were becoming heavy, the cold water dragging him down into the silt where the other witnesses lay. As Azam's strength failed, he felt things touching his legs. But they weren't pulling him down. Beneath him, hundreds of pale, glowing hands rose from the silt. These were the spirits of the other victims, the witnesses who had been used to hold the building's foundation for decades. They didn't want him to join them, they wanted him to tell their story. They formed a spectral bridge, their hands buoying him up and pushing him with a gentle, supernatural force toward the safety of the jogging path. Azam collapsed onto the grass, coughing up lake water, his body shaking with cold. He looked back across the still water. The lake was a mirror again. High in the library window, he saw Farrah one last time. She wasn't pointing anymore, she gave a peaceful wave before her light finally faded into the darkness. Azam opened the mud-caked wallet he had retrieved. He pulled out Farrah's ID card. As he watched, new text appeared on the back in fresh, red ink. "The veil is thinning. Tell them what lies beneath." A library is a place of silence, but some silences are louder than others. Azam escaped the lake, but he can never escape the knowledge of what lies beneath the concrete. The foundation is hungry, archivists. Every building you enter might be held up by the Paku of a forgotten soul. So, the next time you visit a library and feel the temperature drop, don't look for a draft. Look at the floor. And if you see a gold pin in the cement, run. Subscribe to stay in the archive. We have so many more files to index. Welcome home.